Welcome to Second Take, the show that focuses on the issues behind the news. 2009 has been an inauspicious year for the South African economy, with the country descending into its first recession in 17 years. Joining us in studio this week is engineering news editor Terence Creamer, as we reflect on what was a difficult yet interesting year from a news perspective. Terence, welcome to Second Take. When we think back to 2008, that was really the year of the power crisis in South Africa. But would you agree that the recession was the newsmaker of 2009?
Yes, I think the recession was the newsmaker, not only in South Africa, but in the rest of the world. And it defined everything. I think you mentioned the power crisis in your introduction, and it definitely gave us some breathing space and moderated the growth trajectory, which meant the lights stayed on. But across the economy, from corporate earnings through to retrenchments, we've lost nearly 1 million jobs this year. And we're having to try and recover, as well as the social dialogue that took place between Labour and government and business was really focused on dealing with the crisis and responding to the crisis. And some of that was immediate, and we saw some fiscal stimulus coming into the economy. Others have been quite delayed, and we see only this week they were talking about the layoff training scheme and trying to get businesses to use that instead of retrenching workers. So definitely it was the defining factor locally and globally. We saw the big stimulus packages in the US and Europe and across the world, China, which has sort of stabilized things, the big policy responses on the monetary policy side as well, with loose money. We've had to come through a very challenging time, but we haven't descended into depression, and there are signs that we are coming out of it. But we mustn't forget that South Africa also had an election this year, and we've got a new government since May. President Jacob Zuma has been assembling his government and delivering a new strategy for the country. And we have a whole lot of host of new economic ministries, which at times have been somewhat confusing. But we also have a new economic policy debate emerging around the rand and its strength and how to manage the rand, as well as just monetary policy generally and what its role is. And we even have, maybe on the margins, this discussion around mine nationalisation.
Well, having said that the power crisis may have abated because of the recession, we are still facing a number of uncertainties in that regard. Has enough been done?
I think a lot has been done, but you can never do enough. And I don't think we really used the breathing space that was created by the recession to do what we could have done, especially on the energy efficiency side, the demand side, management side. And a lot of that comes down to, I think, the fact that we had a new government coming in from April, May, and they didn't really take up the mantle of the structures that were created in late 2008 to really emphasize that we're still in a crisis. It hasn't gone away. In fact, Eskom is saying 2010, the demand projections look okay, and we should get through that, even in winter and even during the World Cup. But 2011, 2012, that 2012 is when the first Medupi unit gets synchronized to the grid. Just during that period, we're going to be very tight. The reserve margins are going to be very low. Unless we really pull back on our consumption, we're going to face the prospect of load shedding again. So yes, a lot has been done. Eskom did a lot of revisited its tariff application and looked and said, we can't do this alone, which I think is a positive signal that's been sent out. We've got an integrated resource plan, the first version, the first ever, which came from the Department of Energy. I think we have to see it as an interim plan, fairly disappointing at this stage, but we will have a process of social engagement early next year to come up with a much bigger plan for the generation mix going ahead for 20 years.
Well, 2010 is upon us. Do you think we can look forward to a better year?
I think that from a South African perspective, it's definitely going to be better from one perspective, and that's that we're going to be the first African country to host the FIFA Soccer World Cup. And that's going to kick off in June next year. It's a milestone event for South Africa and Africa. It is undermined, I think, locally by people how big an achievement this is, and it shouldn't be undermined. Now, there will be some economic benefits directly from having a whole lot of people converge on our country. Those will be probably fairly modest when the analysis is done, but we mustn't forget the indirect benefits of accelerating a lot of our infrastructure build. That is now in place. That creates the basis for economic growth and development. So I think it's a milestone event. It's going to stand us in good stead in the longer term. And I think more the indirect spin-offs from a 2010 event, the psychological spin-offs of saying we are a world-class country, we can compete with the best. And I think that raising our game, I think that should be the legacy of the World Cup. Raising our productivity, setting goals for putting people to work, and really getting this economy back on a growth path.
Terence, thank you very much. That's the Second Take show for today. Join us again next time for more news analysis.